Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. What's up, everybody? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 139. In this episode, I interview Natty Newfie. He has been gardening for 5 years and grows a wide variety of plants. He has a ton of knowledge when it comes to companion planting, and that's what we're going to get into in today's episode. He talks about what companion planting is, pros, cons, some great plant combinations, and so much more. These podcast episodes are broken up into small clips and placed on their own dedicated YouTube channel called Garden Talk Clips. I also have a YouTube channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who helped make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their electric sprayers with a 2-liter capacity and an adjustable nozzle that can go from a strong jet to a fine mist spray. Their sprayers are battery powered and can be used for 3 hours on a full charge. No pumping required, and it's a one-button operation. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their sprayers, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Stash Blend consists of several ingredients in one, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. It includes corn steep liquor, seaweed extract, humic acid, beneficial bacteria, silica, and mycorrhizal fungi. It can be used in addition to your synthetic base nutrients or be used in living soil systems. Simply mix it into water and water your plants with it. You can get it at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. Spider Farmer. Check out their Glow 30 full spectrum supplemental LED light bars. It's 4 13-inch LED bars designed for intra-canopy or supplemental lighting. It provides expanded light coverage to areas your primary grow lights have trouble reaching. 360-degree rotating spacers on the clips allows you to adjust the light direction, and it features a 7-day programmable digital timer for electrical outlets. Discount code MrGrowIt5 works on both Amazon and their website, spider-farmer.com. And we are back, and I'm joined with Natty Newfie. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Today we're going to talk all about companion planting, something you have a lot of knowledge on. Really excited to get into this. There's so many benefits to companion planting, which we're going to go over. But I think the main ones are that people can think of is to help achieve a better quality and to help achieve a higher yield. We're going to get into those details plus more in this episode. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into gardening?
Yeah. So for me, gardening was all medicinal in many ways, whether it was like, growing my own medicinal herbs and things like that, or if it was just the mental space of being able to go out and get into the garden. But I had a horseback riding accident. We're closing in on maybe like 10 years now. I broke like vertebrae in my back, broke some bones, messed myself up pretty good. And that kind of led me down to the path of trying to garden my own at-home medicine to, kind of alleviate some of those symptoms. And that was the gateway, went from electric lettuce to, next thing I know, I'm growing like calendulas and comfreys and all kinds of different things. And here we are now talking about companion planting because I can't get enough of growing like little indoor jungles and stuff now. So yeah, it's been a fun gateway that it opened up like the floodgates, and now I can't get enough of it. Turns out, got a bit of a green thumb.
I'm sorry to hear about your back, and that sounds brutal. And I'm really glad you made a recovery there. And I like your hat, by the way. For those listening in, they can't see it. It says Only Soils, kind of like the Only Fans logo, but it's Only Soils.
Yeah. That's I only grow my herbs in top quality soil. So Only Soils.
And then you've also you've got a YouTube channel. You're on the FCP channel. Can you talk a little bit about those things?
Yeah. Well, I just kind of started in on the YouTube. It's just vlogs, long-winded vlogs. I got a good gift for gab, so I kind of I've been doing the Instagram thing for 5 or 6 years. Pretty successfully. I really enjoy it, but it's really hard to capture that, like, the true personality of somebody and, like, 10 to 30 second clips and things like that. I like to ramble. I like to talk. So I've been doing some vlogs over there, and every Sunday, 11 a.m., we do Cooked and Caffeinated over on FCP, where we take a whole wide variety of guests from, anything from gardening, anybody who's been kind of getting into this for medicinal needs or whatever it may be, and we just let the conversation roll. We just talk, no script, no nothing. We just two people getting to know each other, and we just do that over a little bit of coffee early on a Sunday morning. And yeah. We're doing that now for a couple of years. That's probably one of my favorite things, is just connect with the community like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I tuned into a couple of the Cooked and Caffeinated shows, and it's really entertaining. It's definitely something like a nice morning show, you know what I mean? To where you can
appreciate that.
Light something up and drink some coffee and just tune in and hang out and chill and listen to a good conversation. And I must say, you have an incredible voice. I don't know if anybody's told you that before, but you have a really good radio voice.
I've heard that once or twice. Yeah. I'm going to be very conscious of it now, right? Welcome to another episode of Garden Talk. That's something that honestly has only been with me for the last few years. I had nose surgery to open up. I had badly deviated septum, and when I opened it up, my voice plummeted.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. It was a nice side effect.
So let's get into companion planting now. Can you break it down for the audience? I know we've got a lot of beginners in here. We do have some intermediate and advanced folks as well, but good amount of beginners in here. Some might not even know what companion planting is. Can you talk to us, what is companion planting? And also, I'm not sure if you know the history behind it, if you can get into that a little bit.
First off, I'm also consider myself a beginner, or maybe like intermediate or something like that. You know what I mean? I love what I'm doing. I love learning about companion planting, but I'm by no means an expert. Companion planting is actually something that we use a fair bit. You'll see in indoor and outdoor. Some people might not even really know they're using. Like cover crop would be one of like a prime example. But companion planting is planting groupings of plants together for mutual benefit, whether they're helping each other through the soil, through the rhizosphere, whether they're providing protection or pest control or shelter or whatever it may be. They're mutually benefiting from each other being there. In terms of history, I think probably the most well-known example would be the Three Sisters. So the Three Sisters are corn, beans, and squash. So the corn grows super tall, but is a really heavy nitrogen feeder. So it grows really tall. That gives a place for the beans to actually travel up. And they're nitrogen fixers. So things like the legumes, right, like beans and peas and other things, they're actually taking atmospheric nitrogen and pulling it back down into their nodes, right? And that's giving it a place for the corn, which is a heavy feeder, to feed off of. The squash are then planted around the base, and the squash create this really nice ground cover, which then, of course, keeps in moisture, prevents a lot of soil erosion, and obviously corn, once again, a heavy feeder, right? So they're kind of feeding off of each other. They're providing the nitrogen, providing the water retention, keeping that topsoil really happy and healthy, and in turn, they're all giving each other what they need to be able to grow. So then you have this very successful crop of corn, beans or peas, and squash, right? So that's probably the most prime example. That's from that's like Native American agriculture for millennia at this point, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you got into that. That's exactly what I was kind of hoping that you would mention. We were asking about the history there, is the Three Sisters. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating that's kind of where it started, at least as far as we know that it started, and how it's evolved from there. And there's so many different benefits of companion planting. And could you get into the primary benefits of companion planting for both, not only just the plants themselves, but the overall garden ecosystem? Soil as well, right? Also, what are the downsides, if there are any?
Let's start with some of the downsides, because like the pros are so many. I think in terms of downsides, Really, like most of the downsides would be if you plant the wrong things. If you plant the wrong pairings, so then something is fighting for nutrients, right? If you plant all nightshades down here, right, your tomatoes and things like that are all fighting for the same nutrients. If you're planting something that's invasive, it might be something you're not supposed to plant in your state or in your province or in your country. So you always want to check those things out. Or it might be something that you have a hard time removing from the garden. Mint would be a prime example. I love mint, but that can get out of control really, really quickly. And if you don't love mint and you don't want to be constantly chopping it and dropping it and trying to maintain it and contain it, it can get out of hand. So, I mean, like in terms of downsides, those are like, you know, they're not exactly like the worst things ever. But in terms of the benefits, like there's so many to that. And like you're saying too, right? It's for all aspects of that entire garden ecosystem. And there are some serious rabbit holes to go down, especially when you start getting into like what's going on in the rhizosphere in terms of like exudates and things like that. But like some of the main things, obviously like soil erosion, nutrient cycling is fantastic. Soil hydraulics, the obviously nitrogen fixation is a big one, and something that like a lot of us would probably be fairly common with, especially with cover crops. Control of like the moisture retention, obviously, weed suppression, pest control, and pollinators, bringing in the right pollinators and bringing in the right beneficial predators. That's like, yeah, there's so many things, right? But like that's what you're trying to do is like you're just trying to cultivate this entire ecosystem. That's how it would work. If you're out in the woods, that's how it works, right? Like you go and look around you, like nobody's out there feeding nutrients to everybody. Like, you know, nobody's out there top dressing the woods. It's everybody's working together to break down material, to cycle nutrients, to hold water, to provide cover, to do all these things so that those ecosystems can thrive. And that's kind of what we're trying to do is you're trying to, you know, benefit from canopy to rhizosphere, right? So
Awesome. Yeah, that was a good recap there. So it could be so beneficial in so many different ways. And I'd like to narrow down on some of those points.
yeah.
You know, you mentioned pest control. That's one thing we can get into next. Well, after that, we can touch upon like weed suppression, pollination, which you touched upon, soil ecosystem, beneficial insects, and crop productivity. So
Yeah.
let's start with the pest control. Can you tell us how does companion planting contribute to natural pest control? And can you give some specific examples?
Yeah. Also, I'll try to touch on like some of the ones that like are a little more easily accessible to a lot of us, and some things that we're pretty familiar with, and you could probably grow it in whatever zone you're in. But in terms of like, they do it a couple of different ways. So you have like scent, so through essential oils, the release of certain smells that deter pests, bringing in beneficial predators, trap cropping, or even trap confusion. So in terms of scents, marigolds, basil, lemongrass, a lot of the herbs that you would use in culinary things or in medicinal herbs and things like that, a lot of those are actually usually also great at repelling pests. So like mint, rosemary, garlic, basil, marigolds, all these things that you can plant that you're going to probably consume them yourself as well. They're also very good at deterring pests. So a lot of them release their essential oils, like basil, fantastic. Marigolds would probably be the one that a lot of people would associate with companion planting. You'll see that indoors and outdoors. So the marigold itself does release an essential oil, right? A smell that'll deter things like aphids, white flies, and some others. But it also has a compound that it releases into the soil called thiophene, and that actually deters predatory nematodes. So, and they can, there's other things like marigolds can also be like a trap crop as well, so that like it'll attract other things to come eat it before they make it to your plants. But some of the major benefits for that, yeah, like I'm saying, are just the deterrence of the smells. So, which is cool because like they all have like multiple uses, right? You could grow basil and rosemary and thyme, lemongrass, all these things that you can use in culinary, used in medicinal herbs and things like that. But they also deter gnats, whiteflies, aphids, and other bugs. I think a great example of that would, just for even in just your garden or just in your backyard alone, citronella plant. Something that we're all we find very commonly in like Walmart or wherever you're going. You can get like citronella candles and citronella sprays. You can plant the citronella plant around the perimeter of your property, and that deters things like mosquitoes and other gnats, right? So like, so in terms of scents, you have a lot of different options there. But there's also like trap cropping. So one of my favorites, probably, if you've seen me grow indoors or outdoors, nasturtiums. I love nasturtiums. So we plant nasturtiums around the outside of like a stand-up bed or out around the perimeter. And a lot of these like pests and stuff, they'll go and they'll probably consume the nasturtium first. They just kind of get lost in it. They eat this first, and they don't make their way into your tomatoes or into your cabbages or whatever it is they're making their way to. That's probably one of my favorites because you can eat the entire thing, right? You can eat the leaves, you can eat the stems, you can eat the flower, plus it's trapping other ones, and they kind of make a home there first before they ever make their way into your precious crops, right? So, plus they're pretty. And they make a great ground cover, right? They have a lot of extra, like, kind of uses.
That citronella tip you mentioned is gold for a lot of people, man. I know I used to live in Massachusetts and mosquitoes were crazy, and they have the citronella candles and sprays and all that stuff. It's like planted around your property. You know what I mean? Like the perimeter property, and help get rid of those. I don't know how well that'll work. I mean, I guess it depends on how big your property is and stuff like that. But I can imagine some of that stuff working really, really good. And marigolds. One you didn't name, which I'll throw out there, is peppermint. So peppermint is another one that kind of falls in that category of pest control. I use that as IPM spray. So essential oil mixed with water and surfactant, and spraying that on the plants, around the plants and soil, stuff like that, once a week, well, every other week, kind of rotating sprays. Rosemary you mentioned, and so there are a ton of different things like that are going to help with pest control, and I'm glad you got into them.
And you'll find those like you're saying, in a lot of your, your organic sprays and stuff are usually some form of like peppermint, oregano, rosemary, cloves, cinnamon, any of those kind of like essential oils and stuff. And you find a lot of those in some of your natural herbs and stuff that you can grow. So they have like multiple uses. They could be ground covers, they could be pest deterrents, or you can pick them off and throw them in the frying pan. So
that's awesome. Yeah, you get multiple uses out of it.
Yeah.
Let's get into weed suppression next. How can companion planting suppress weeds?
So in terms of weed suppression, simply they just outcompete. So low-lying ground covers can just outcompete weeds. Things like we're talking about like cover crops and things. Like lentils are usually in there. Lentils are a very low-lying kind of cover. They'll grow very quickly. They'll vine across, and that usually chokes out any other kind of weed trying to get through. Same thing with like the nasturtiums, the squash, and other things that can like create a really good ground cover and create like a lot of shade. They're choking out those weeds, right? Really hard for weeds to get established when that's happening. But that's also like it's kind of leads into something else. Is like, sure, they're choking out the weeds and they're creating this really nice ground cover, but that's also then creating a really nice place for like beneficial mites and predators and other things to come in, right? So it's hard to talk about like one thing without having to talk about all of it, because there's so many like benefits. But that's pretty well, when it comes to suppressing weeds, for the most part, you're just choking them out very quickly. And you have a lot of options there, right? You can do lentils and things that are also helping with like nitrogen and stuff. But you can, if you want to get like a little prettier with it with ground covers, you can do like creeping thyme or phlox. Crimson clover is another one that we're usually fairly familiar with, and like lamb's ears, things like that. They create this really nice ground cover, low lying, great then, of course, for like water retention and things like that. But they're just out competing, right? Making sure that those weeds just cannot get a foothold in your garden, right?
I appreciate you mentioned a bunch of examples there. Yeah, I have a buddy here in Las Vegas. That's where I live. It's very, very hot out here. It's let's see, right now it's 100 degrees out, and it often reaches 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And
Freedom units.
yeah, freedom.
What is that? 110 Fahrenheit to Canadian units.
You got to do the calculation there. I don't know what it is in Celsius.
I'm from Labrador, so yeah, so that's like mid 40s, which is like I'm in New Jersey right now. I could barely handle it when it hits like mid 30s, right? I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador, which is like one of the coldest provinces. Like
a big change for you.
It is a massive change, man.
But I have a buddy that lives here who uses melon as a cover. You know what I mean? The melon, they grow so big, the leaves are just so massive that it really covers almost his entire bed, and it helps with water retention, really, because like soil dries out so quickly, so easily here in such high temps that having that cover over it helps tremendously. So I figured I'd call that one out.
Yeah, and that's great, because that's like we're talking about with the three sisters, right? The squash, so like squash, melons, anything that's got those large leaves that are growing over the top, right? Like they're creating that really nice like canopy there where they're holding in that moisture. The sun's not able to get down and penetrate. It's keeping the soil from becoming like hydrophobic. And yeah, and then of course if you start to compare it with like beans and peas and other things, now we're pumping nitrogen and other things back down into the soil. I get like, this is one of those topics where there's so many like benefits that it's hard to just be like, yeah, let's just talk about this one thing, because it's you're creating such an amazing ecosystem that feeds the soil, feeds the plants, feeds the air, and they all protect each other and they work off each other. And it's just, it's something that it's always been pretty exciting for me. I got inspired from Niagara Homegrown, CB Tree, and Nikita Green Thumb. They were accounts that were either doing like big, beautiful gardens outdoors that were just like lush from one end of their backyard to another, or in like Niagara Homegrown's case, he had a 100-gallon pot in his basement with living soil, and he would switch out his electric lettuce throughout his time, but there was always like nasturtiums and peppers and beans and peas and things hanging off the side, and that's kind of what got me into it. And now I can't help but grow like that. Like, first time I ever did it with 7-gallon pots, 4 7-gallon pots in a little 2.5 square tent indoors. I grew thyme, dill, chamomile, nasturtiums, and a few others. That was the easiest grow I have ever had. I used less nutrients, less water. The terpene production on everything was through the roof, and just the visuals and just opening up that tent, that rich botanical smell would come through. Everybody was happy, healthy, pest-free. It was the easiest grow I've ever done. And I try to incorporate that now into everything that I do, and it pays off in droves for me.
Yeah, I feel like companion planting is probably one of the most underutilized processes, or underutilized techniques in gardening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like more people should be doing it. You don't see a whole lot of people doing it. I imagine if I took a poll, actually, I probably will do a poll and figure out how many people do you companion plant, yes, no, type thing, and see how many people do it. I would be willing to bet there's got to be at least, I don't know, I'd say 80+% people don't do it.
Yeah. Well, I've seen so many gardens where people are, they have this new backyard or this new plot or whatever it is, and they just plant a few crops in there, and they kind of struggle. It's like, well, like this one needs shade. This one needs more nitrogen. This one's a heavy feeder. This needs this. But also the biggest thing is like the ground. Like you haven't really done anything with the ground itself. So maybe it's compacted. Maybe it doesn't have as much nitrogen or anything that it needs. Just throwing over a cover crop, which is something you'll see in a lot of like agricultural farm practices, especially in like regenerative. Beans or oats and peas would be a prime example. We go in and flood an entire field that needs to be turned over the next year. You'll fill it with oats and peas. The oats grow tall, the peas grow up it. It's an amazing source of nitrogen and proteins and amino acids and things like that when crimped and decomposed, but it's also creating a lot of nitrogen down into the soil, a lot of nitrogen fixation. So the next year, when you come to plant on that, you've got this very rich compost over the top. The soil is very like open and very loamy. It's very happy, and it's full of nutrients, right? And I think that's something that like a lot of people are missing. It's like, oh, you could bring a lot of life and vitality and soil fertility back by just like a few simple companions. And if you're having a problem with pests, throw some basil out there, throw some lemon grass, throw some mint, do a few of those other things. But yeah, it's hopefully we'll see more people get into it. I don't think people quite understand some of the real benefits of it as well, because it's a lot of it. Maybe you're just throwing nasturtiums out there and you think they look pretty, but they're serving like multiple purposes in there, right? So
yeah, great point. Pollination. I want to get into that next. Now, there are many fruits, vegetables, plenty of plants out there that need to be pollinated in order to produce. Right? A good example would be peppers. Right now, you can do it by hand, sure. Peppers, melons, citrus trees, the list goes on. How does companion planting help with pollination?
Pollinators. We all love our pollinators. Whether that's bees, bumblebees, honeybees, butterflies, hummingbirds, moths, whatever it is, you're creating a home for them to come in. So we bring them in with things like calendula, lavender, nasturtiums. Once again, right? Like so many of these are interchangeable. You're creating a home for them to come in, and if they're drawn and attracted to the potential pollinate flowers and things that are in your garden, then you've got more pollinators kicking around. They're going to be able to pollinate your cucumbers, your melons, your peppers, and all the other things that are honestly so annoying to hand pollinate. If you've ever hand pollinated cucumbers, you will understand how much you love pollinators to come in and do that job for you. But that's it, right? You get more of an abundant crop. One of my favorites, cucamelons. I don't know if you've ever seen these things. These little, they're like in between a cucumber and a watermelon. They're only like this big. They're the most adorable little things. But they produce hundreds of little flowers. And every day when you go out, they would be full of bees doing their thing. It brings them in. But for me, that's like a little garden snack. So I could walk out, get like a pocket full of those, and walk around and check your crops. But things like that, like bringing in your nasturtiums, your milkweed, and all these flowers that like bring in hummingbirds and pollinators. They're just making sure that there's a little more, there's more bees, there's more hummingbirds, and there's more friends to go around to make sure you're actually getting your crops to pollinate properly. And it works. You get way more of an abundant crop, and it's way easier that way.
Got it. How about the soil ecosystem? How can companion planting improve soil health and fertility? And what are some effective plant combinations for this purpose?
Yeah. So this is like the rabbit hole that you can go down. This is like one of my favorite parts about this. So we're preventing soil erosion. We're retaining water. Obviously, you're fixing like hydrophobic soil and things like that. We're feeding the rhizosphere through nitrogen fixation, exudates. We're producing a better nutrient cycle, right? So some great ones that we're very used to. Anything in like the legumes, like green beans and fava beans and peas, and then there's like white clover, red clover, alfalfa, all these things. They're bringing in atmospheric nitrogen. They're pulling it in from the atmosphere and putting it down into their nodules, which is great. It is wonderful for anything that is a heavy feeder that needs a little extra nitrogen. Which you can there's a lot of like cool stuff you can do with that. You don't have to just do like traditional nitrogen fixing crops like that. You can do like there's shrubs and trees and things like that you can do like long-term nitrogen fixation. Like one of my favorites, sea buckthorn berries. I love sea buckthorn, one of my favorites. It's a superfood kind of thing, but it's a beautiful bush that can obviously fixate nitrogen. One thing I think that a lot of people are I find very commonly is comfrey. Comfrey is a dynamic accumulator with a really big taproot. So it drives this really big taproot way down and pulls all kinds of nutrients up, making it a little easier for other shallower root zones to be able to achieve some of those nutrients. But it also makes a really good green mulch because it pulls it into these giant leaves. You chop and drop those around. Of course, now we're laying out this nice green mulch, which is better for soil erosion once again, water retention. But you're feeding the rhizosphere and you're feeding the fungal life, and it can reinvigorate your area pretty quickly. So things like obviously beans and peas and things like that are great. Barley and oats and things that can help with like nitrogen lockout and things like that as well. But then of course if you chop them, they make a really good mulch cover. So you're all about like soil is that's where everybody's going, right? So if it's hydrophobic and it's sad and it has really shallow root zones, like you want deep root zones. You want to keep that moisture in there. You want to cycle those nutrients. And that's kind of where we start getting into the wormhole, that rabbit hole of exudates, because then we start looking at like basal exudates or your marigolds and other things like that are not just like putting nitrogen into the soil, but can be dropping like polysaccharides, amino acids. They're signaling to each other. They're releasing mucilages that can retain more moisture in the soil. Like there's so many benefits to being able to have this diverse rhizosphere and this ecosystem in there that just feeds the soil and keeps that, not only that topsoil happy, but like deep down into the soil, you're preventing the compaction. You're bringing nitrogen and other nutrients and stuff that we couldn't get. We're bringing them up to the surface with things like comfrey. So that's one of those things where like there's so many benefits to the soil in terms of like how we can cycle nutrients, water retention, or even produce our own compost and mulches that can better feed that soil and that topsoil throughout the years. So that's one of those ones where like I feel like you do a whole episode on just like exudates, like those mucilage that's produced in there, because they could signal to each other, like if one plant is being eaten up by whatever, it could say, hey, I'm being eaten, we're being attacked. They could communicate through the root zones and say, I need more sugars to be able to produce more terpenes, or I need more amino acids to be able to create more whatever I need to be able to fend off this pest. I need more essential oils. So maybe then the basil releases more essential oils. Like there's just so much to that, but yeah, it's amazing what you can do with like barren soil with just a little bit of like cover crops. Like I say, bring in nitrogen, bring in more nutrients, and creating like that mulch layer, right? So you can restore and balance your soil pretty quickly.
It truly is incredible. Yeah, you mentioned clover. That's something I use. I use a white Dutch clover nitrogen fixer, right? So it's going to grab the nitrogen from the air, like you mentioned, put it down in the root zone, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll hold that in the nodules until the plant is actually killed off. So the plant actually needs to be killed off, and then it's kind of released. I'm not sure if the microbes need to then cycle those nutrients or what, but I'm told that's not really available as if the clover's still alive and it's still growing. The nitrogen actually isn't available till it's killed off. Now, is that true or false?
So it does depend on the plant. So there's some clover pull it into the green leaves and it needs to be chopped. It's like kind of like your barley, your oats. Some clovers need to be chopped. Others do pull it down into nodules, but there's a bacteria that reacts with those nodules to release nitrogen, right? There's several types of like nitrogen releasing bacteria. Hence not the expert talk right here, right? Bacteria, nitrogen, roots, happy. From what I've been reading, and I've been doing a lot of stuff on I get a lot of my info from like sciencedirect.org and a few other places where you can kind of read the studies on exudates and nitrogen fixation. Like things like alfalfa. Alfalfa is probably the top nitrogen fixer, but it has to be chopped and dropped. Beans and peas will pull it down into the soil, but they're reacting with bacteria that's in the soil that will actually release nitrogen throughout their life cycle as well, right? Hence why like the Three Sisters work so well, right? Corn really needs that feed, and the beans and peas and things release that nitrogen down in there through that bacterial process, right? So it's one of those things where you would want to look up like, okay, I'd like to add more nitrogen to the soil. Do I need to do chop and drop all the time, or can I add something that's going to slowly release and feed? But it's beneficial to have it from all aspects. So that's why you'll see in like cover crops, you'll have like lentils, fenugreek, barley, uh, clover, and a few others. Some are good for chopping and dropping and releasing forms of nitrogen. Others are like you say, they're holding it down in those nodules. Some are releasing it through bacteria, and others need to be killed off in the process. But like clover will almost like reseed itself as well, right? So it really good at fixing nitrogen, but then it just dies off, and it'll come back in the spring with new seeds, right? So
Okay, understood. Exudates episode. Are you volunteering yourself for it? Because that would be a pretty cool episode. I agree with you.
I mean, yeah, that's something that like, we could get into, because it's pretty cool how, like I say, like, that's the one thing that a lot of us think about is nitrogen. But we're also producing like the marigold, right? And what's that, thiophene, right? This root exudate that tells predatory nematodes to go away, but they also communicate with each other and exchange carbon and exchange nitrogen and amino acids, polysaccharides. There's mucilages that like protect things. Like it's huge, but it's amazing. And that's where we're getting all of our nutrients from. That's where we're getting our strong, resilient plants from, is biodiverse ecosystems that are communicating not just in the soil, but in the canopy and wherever else. But yeah, that would be a big episode for sure. That's when we start getting into it. I was like, man, I don't know where to like cut myself off with exudates. But like nitrogen fixation, right? That's one of the biggest things that we would probably be most commonly like aware of, because a lot of people use cover crops, and that's one of the major benefits of it, right?
So if you want to see an Exudates episode, let us know down in the comments section below. Just leave it down there on YouTube, and we'll if there's enough demand, we'll get them back on here, and we'll do it. Beneficial insects. I want to get into that next. Can you discuss the role of companion planting in attracting beneficial insects to the garden?
Yeah. Well, once again, one of the ones that we're most commonly used to would be ladybugs. Or green lacewings, praying mantises, things like that. But like ladybugs, we can attract them in with things like yarrow, calendula, milkweed, some of these other flowers and things like this. They bring in your predators that are beneficial predators. So the ladybugs, the green lacewings. They're ones that you would see that get attracted due to flowers. So they come in, they hang out, and they make a home. They see you have aphids, cool. They go to town on them. But then you also have, like, let's say our cover crops like the nasturtiums and other things that are creating a really nice home just above the soil. That's creating a nice place for like beneficial mites and rove beetles. So you're just creating a home. You're making a home for things like ladybugs, praying mantises, your green lacewings who come in and eat aphids and eat whiteflies and mealybugs and other things like that. So it's just another part of that. Like, yeah, just make a home for them, right? And they'll come in. Same with the pollinators. You're making a home for them. They'll come in. They'll pollinate your crops while they're there. Same thing with your ladybugs and your green lacewings. Make a home. They'll come in and they'll just eat all the bad insects while they're there, right? So
not all bugs are bad. Some people, right, I think, jump to that assumption that, I got bugs, and how do I get rid of them? It's like, well, hold on, what is it? And it ends up being a beneficial, it's like, what the heck?
Yeah. Well, that's like, the springtails are one of those ones that, like, people see and they pot and they panic. Like, oh my god, it's full of, like, all these little white things. Well, I mean, like, they're down there, breaking down, like, decomposing matter. So, like, come on in, come hang out. Right? As long as things are not, like, an infestation, right? A balance it needs to be. Obviously, aphids, they don't get the balance. Get out of here. Go away. We don't want you. You're going to eat our crops. But in terms of like, your rove beetles, your springtails and things like that, like they're in there to balance things out. They're breaking down decomposing matter, which then can feed the bacteria, the protozoa, the rotifers, everybody else that's in there, the fungal life. And once then, that's right back into like nutrient cycling. They're able to break it down and feed it in, and yeah, it's just as long as there's balance. So you create a home for those pollinators and for those beneficial bacteria and for those beneficial mites and predators and everybody to come in. And it's like I say, it's like one of the easiest grows you'll ever do. When you find balance where like you're able to repel certain pests and bring in what you want, you just got to go out and water it.
Balance is definitely key. I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you have that imbalance, it could kind of throw things off, right? If you have an overpopulation of something, well, that could take over. I heard a lot of people having issues with roly-polies. And just take over. It's harmful. It ends up being a harmful thing instead of a beneficial thing.
Yeah. And like roly-polies can be your friend, but if there's too many, it's the same thing, right? Like balance. You must find balance. And that's, I mean, that, that goes further the companion planting though, right? That's, how do you water? How do you keep things clean? Humidity, air. That's like, that's a whole thing on itself. But that's achieving balance. Like once you find balance, some of these grows are so easy. I've been doing a lot of my companion planting and stuff indoors, and like, it's so easy to keep those pots moist, but without having them soaked and waterlogged. The surface tension, like you almost never get hydrophobic soil. Your leaf sets, everybody's happy and fed and healthy the entire time. Everything that I put in there, the electric lettuce would be like praying the entire time. No top dresses, just water and good quality soil to start. And it makes it so easy, and just so like the basil is more fragrant. The peppers you grow are spicier and have more flavor. The tomatoes, everything just seems so much happier and healthier. Plus, you're growing it at home. That's a huge thing right there.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in the episode that you had an amazing terpene profile when you do companion planting. Let's get into that a little bit more. How does companion planting actually enhance the flavor, growth, yield of certain crops, and what are some examples of that?
Well, that's another one where there's so many examples, but it's the same as like, the three sisters, obviously, right? The corn is a heavy feeder, so that's feeding off of the nitrogen. They're being able to produce a heavier crop. In terms of like at home, like indoor growing, whatever it may be, things like basil. Basil's one that they're talking a lot about, like exudates in there are producing a lot of like sugars, polysaccharides, and possibly like other amino acids and stuff, so that the plant that it's in the same pot with can have an easier time uptaking those when it needs to fight off stress, drought, or if it's in the middle of, making glandular trichome heads. So it can produce more essential oils easier, and it's got everything it needs in there to make more complex profiles. And I can, a lot of what I'm saying may be anecdotal from me. You can go read this. You can go read the papers that tell you like what is the actual actions that go in there. But every pepper I've grown at home, it doesn't even matter if it's a jalapeno. A jalapeno will hit you like a reaper. Like it's so much stronger. The healing herb, the electric lettuce is happier and healthier, praise the whole time. It reeks. It's very complex terpene profiles. It's just so much easier to produce these really complex smells. But even our companion plants, so like the basil, the basil, like you open up that tent, the smells that come through there, unbelievable. But they're all doing that through those actions down in the rhizosphere. So they're keeping that root zone happy and healthy. They're feeding, of course, the bacteria, the protozoa, everybody that's down in there. They're feeding it through the root zone, through these exudates, but they're also communicating with each other. So when we start to get heavy into flower or into drought or whatever it may be, a little extra heat stress, they say, hey, I need a little more whatever amino acid, I need a little more sugar, I need a little more carbon. Do you have that? Can you feed the roots? And they talk to each other, and you get these just lush, happy, healthy, tasty crops. And it's you'll see the difference. You find the right pairings, you'll see the difference for sure.
Talking about pairing, can you provide some examples of kind of classic companion plant pairs and explain why they work well together?
Yeah. Well, so like basil tomatoes would probably be a pretty good one. You see a fair amount of. Basil repels like white flies that would eat the tomatoes and aphids as well. And the tomatoes provide shelter for the basil, and the basil in turn produces more exudates to feed it more sugars and things that it needs. Um, Carrots and onions. These actually carrots and onions are actually a pretty cool one because the carrots repel onion flies and onions repel carrot flies.
Oh, wow.
Right? And then if you pair those, of course, then with other things that are going to be able to feed the soil, like, back into like your lentils and your peas and beans and stuff, you're keeping the soil quite healthy because they're usually like onions and carrots are usually planted very far apart from everybody else, right? There's a lot of like waste space kind of in there. I don't know, in terms of like, maybe cabbage and dill. Cabbage and dill is another like really good one where the dill bring in like lacewings and ladybugs and they'll eat some of the like cabbage eating worms and pests, right? So there's the biggest thing is in terms of like pairings is what do you want to grow? What is the crop that you are going to eat? Look up the crop, you'll be like, these are the ones I like and I really have a hard time growing them. But they're always getting chewed up, whatever it is happening. So, okay, I want to grow carrots. Well, then I'll pair them with onions this year. I love tomatoes, but I always struggle with them. Well, then I'll feed my tomatoes, basil, and like peas and beans or something like that to be able to help feed the soil, and especially those heavy feeders like tomatoes and corns and melons and beans. Like, biggest thing is just look it up. Like, what are the things that you want to grow and you want to have a successful crop of? There's a pairing for it. There's also a pairing that will probably not help it as well. So, biggest thing is just look it up. Be like, I want a big healthy crop of this year. What goes well with it?
I have a couple listed here that I figured I'd mention, although I don't know why they're good pairs. Maybe you can answer that for me. Alyssum with tomatoes, lettuce with beans, and cucumbers and basil. Have you heard about any of those pairs before?
I honestly haven't even heard about those pairings. So one thing I have noticed is a lot of the pairings of like why one doesn't work or why one does, a lot of it's anecdotal. It's like old farmer talk kind of thing. What is it? Is it dill and tomatoes? They say that like early dill feeds the tomatoes, but then when it grows up tall, it stunts the tomatoes. But nobody says why it stunts the tomatoes. They don't say if it's stealing nutrients or what it is. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of like, oh, we just don't put those together because they just don't do well. And I'm cool with that. You got a lot of experience with it and it doesn't work together. All right, I'll take you face value for that. But there's a lot of it you might want to that's why I say like do some research, look it up, kind of, maybe it's just because it's an old wives' tale or whatever it is, but yeah.
Good advice, look it up.
Yeah. Honestly, it's 2024, right? Like get on Google, look it up, see what grows well in your area. What kind of crops do you want to grow? What would pair well with them? And if you want to go you want to get crazy with it, like how you restore your soil and how we feed the soil and whatever else we're doing, you can go to like I say, Science Direct. I think it's .org or .com, and you can look up all kinds of studies of like what is the alfalfa as a cover crop, fenugreek as a cover crop, barley, nasturtiums, exudates. Like you can break it down into what are the absolute best pairings for what I'm doing, right? So. I mean, that's what I do.
Although you probably do have to be careful because I imagine that there's a lot of misinformation out there. Would you happen to know any specific resources, any websites that you can think of that are credible that you would recommend to beginners interested in learning more about the companion planting?
Honestly, no. I know. sorry to not be able to help you, but the way it works for me is like how I do things is I'll take like a huge pile of information. I'll read every website I could possibly read. I'll find every study I can find, and then I'll just cross-reference everything. Do you know what I mean? Like and I just kind of lose myself down like down a rabbit hole, and I come out the other side like Exudates, so yeah, it's the biggest thing is just just read a lot, watch a lot, try to decipher in between what's hooey and what's not, and just plant things and see if they work. If they don't plant it again.
There we go. Pretty straightforward. I did want to ask you about your thoughts on the 12 seed cover crop. There's other types of packs of cover crops, which one of the most common is like a 12 seed blend.
Yeah.
Build a Soil sells it. It's on Amazon. That can certainly be used as companion planting. Do you recommend those, or would you say go individual planting of plants instead?
I like a grouping of it. Like, so the cover crops are great. They only serve so much purpose, right? So like there's a lot of like low-lying cover crops in there that are great for choking out weeds and good for weed suppression, and of course that water retention and things like we were talking about. There's a lot of nitrogen fixers and stuff in there, but there's no basils, and there's no marigolds, and there's no trap crops. Like there's things that are missing from that. That is the cover crops, which it's funny you say 12 because it went like, I think it was like 5 a couple of years ago, and then it was 7, and now it's 12, and I don't know where it's going to go from there. But I love seeing it get tailored more and more as time goes by. But they can only go so far. They're fantastic for revitalizing that topsoil, establishing your soil very quickly, establishing a good rhizosphere and things. But of course, there's some missing things. So I love cover crop. Go out there, fill in as much space as you can, but you still want to incorporate your things like your basils and your yarrows and your marigolds and lemongrass and other things like that, right? You still need to find a home for those, especially in terms of like pollinators and things like that, right? So I like them, but yeah, I don't know. You can get the 5s or the 7s or the 12s and still be very happy.
You bring up a really great point, though, that there are things missing, right? So I think some people grab those blends, the 12 seed blend, for example, and they think that, well, they're good to go. They've got everything they need but no, you can certainly add more things on, other companion plants to the mix, and have more benefits on it.
I think for indoor growers, those cover crops make a lot of sense. Like you can do your basils. Like I do a little bit of everything, right? I've done like corn indoors. I constantly have like basil and sunflowers and comfreys and all kinds of stuff. But in terms of like, if you're starting like living soil pots indoors and you want to establish that pot really quickly, you want to have a more evenly dispersed watering, that nitrogen fixation, especially if we're indoor growing and we're growing the electric lettuce, it's usually, loves its nitrogen, loves those things. Those cover crops, they're great for you. They're fantastic for you. If we start to go outdoors and now we're dealing with more pests and we need more pollinators and we don't want to be out there every day hand pollinating things, that's when we start incorporating some more of those companion plants. So those basils, those marigolds, those flowers, whatever it may be. But those cover crops still serve a purpose out there too. Because like companion planting, it doesn't just feed the soil and feed those plants. We're also maximizing our spacing, right? Because you can do cover crop. You can also do like intercropping, where you grow certain crops together, which you can pair with companion planting. But we're trying to just maximize that space, right? I got away from monocropping. I always found it so weird that I would like have all this expensive, beautiful soil and these big pots downstairs and stuff, but I was just growing like one crop. And then when it was done, it was just like maybe add a little cover crop and then back to this one more crop again. I like to be able to I harvest one and then there's another coming behind it, where they're all feeding each other. So at the same time, I'm harvesting like things for my culinary adventures in the kitchen, for herbal medications, for topicals, you're feeding the soil, whatever it may be. I want that to I want to maximize every square inch of that soil that I have, whether it's indoor or out.
Got it. Sounds like a great way to go about it. Man, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on this talk here. I feel like we could go so much deeper and so many different avenues within this, but we're going to wrap things up here. Can you tell listeners how they can find you and what you have upcoming in the future?
Well, you can find me Instagram or YouTube, Natty's Naughty Nursery, KNOTTY. And right now we're on a little break from Cooked and Caffeinated, but we'll be back in the fall and the winter with a whole round of new guests over on FCP, 11 a.m. Eastern, Sundays. And that's it. Other than that, thank you so much for having me on here today. I know I'm a little rambly and trying to pick the best things from this because this is such a broad topic, but I feel like it's something that hopefully people can now see is a little more approachable, and you can start to understand why you have cover crops, why we want a companion plant, and how we can get a little bit more out of our indoor and outdoor gardens. So I really appreciate you having me on here today.
I appreciate you coming on. I definitely learned quite a bit here, and I'm feeling my audience did as well. You do a really great job of breaking things down in a manner that a lot of people can understand, is what I'll say,
Well, I'm a simple man, and I like to keep it simple. I think you truly understand something when you can speak it in layman terms, and I'm pretty good at breaking it down.
Right. Awesome. All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Natty, thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll see you later.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.